Hey everyone, in today's video, I'm going to share 5 common mistakes teachers make when using the writing workshop model. Now, over the last many years or so, I do feel like the writing workshop phrase has become kind of a dirty term in education, and I understand why, with the science of reading becoming more and more popular and teachers really diving into learning about how students learn to read. But when it comes to writing, I have read many different research articles, including ones from Letters, where they don't talk about the writing workshop model specifically using that term, but they do talk about the benefits of teaching genres and teaching in the I do, we do, you do type model, teaching students the writing process. These are all positives. I even share some that were shared from Letters, some important things to remember about teaching writing here in this video. And I don't know, maybe I should stop using the term writing workshop because I guess I don't use it in the most traditional way, but essentially I use it as an I do, we do, you do type format. So anyways, that was just a little rambling about my thoughts of writing workshop. In today's video, I do want to share 5 common mistakes teachers make when using writing workshop that I think will help them as they're transitioning to a more structured writing approach. So if you're ready to see what these are, give this video a like, subscribe to my channel, and let's get started. All right, mistake number 1 that many teachers make when using the writing workshop model is that they're not using clear, detailed, structured mini lessons. A lot of synonyms there: clear, structured, detailed, but essentially a lot of times teachers won't necessarily make a very detailed mini lesson, and they'll keep it a little too loosey-goosey, we can say, where students don't know exactly what they're doing when they go back to their independent writing. So there's a few ways you can help with this. Number 1 is to follow the same exact structure each day in your writing workshop, right? So I mentioned earlier this I do, we do, you do type of strategy, type of structure, and that is something I follow every single day during our writing block. So essentially students will always come to the rug or wherever your meeting spot is. I will explain to them explicitly what we are going to work on today in writing. And now that lesson will look a little bit different each day, but that'll be a very clear lesson. I will show them exactly how to go about doing that by, modeling on the board and adding to my own writing piece, which I'll talk about later. And then students will take that information and they will go and apply exactly that lesson to their own writing. So it should follow the same structure each day, and your actual mini lesson should be very explicit. So when you're planning out your lessons and you're thinking within which genre you are writing, let's start with personal narratives. There's going to be some specific lessons that you want your students to go over. For example, students will need to know what a personal narrative is. In my class, they learn the say it, sketch it strategy, which is where they say part of their story aloud and then they sketch something immediately to go with it. This is just to get their ideas down on paper, so I teach them say it, sketch it. I teach them how to stretch out those illustrations. During our personal narrative unit, I like to teach them about transition words. I like to teach them about adding character details, adding background details. We talk about captivating illustrations and what those look like, and of course we edit and publish our work as well. Those are some examples of some mini lessons I teach within my personal narratives unit, and then as I take each one, let's say it and sketch it, I am telling my students during that mini lesson, today we're going to practice a strategy called say it and stretch it. And I explicitly explain exactly how to do it, and then I go ahead and model it for them before they practice it themselves. So as you are looking at your writing block this year, make sure you are keeping a nice, clear structure for your students, and make sure your lessons are detailed and explicit. The second mistake many teachers make when teaching writing workshop is they skip the foundational skills. Now, oftentimes in writing workshop and with many writing workshop curriculums, I see only genre-based lessons, and they kind of skip out on those foundational skills, the composition skills that your students really need. So to combat this as teachers, we need to ask ourselves during each genre, what foundational skills do our students need? And that's going to be different in kindergarten, in first grade, in second grade, and it's going to be different based on the class makeup you have each year. Some years your students are going to really need to focus on sentence structure. Maybe your first grade students don't know what a complete sentence looks like or sounds like yet, and that's going to become an explicit lesson that you teach your students. Maybe your students really need help with punctuation. They are not putting end punctuation on any of their sentences. That needs to become an explicit lesson. And you just sprinkle those in with the other genre lessons that you have. But again, going back to mistake number 1, make sure you explicitly teach them how to do it. So if you're doing end punctuation, teach them what a period is, what a question mark is, what an exclamation point is, when you use them, and show them what it looks like to actually use that in writing. And going off what I just said about using it in the writing, it is more effective. Research has shown that it's more effective for students to practice these skills within an authentic writing piece. So to practice adding end punctuation or writing a complete sentence in their story that they're writing, as opposed to having them just do like worksheets where they practice writing a complete sentence or where they practice like adding end punctuation. That's a good thing to do so your students understand, like, oh, read this sentence and decide what type of punctuation it needs. That's an okay practice to have your students do, but it is more authentic to have them then go ahead and challenge them to write a question in their personal narrative, or write an exclamatory sentence. That would probably make more sense than a question in their personal narrative. But if you're teaching them what an exclamatory sentence is and the use of an exclamation point, see if they can then go add one into their story. So to fix mistake number 2 is to make sure you actually look at your students' needs and sprinkle in those lessons for those foundational and compositional skills that your students need. Mistake number 3 teachers often make is a lack of clear modeled examples. Now I kind of mentioned this in number 1, it was wrapped up in that skill, but it was so important that I wanted to pick it out as mistake number 3, because a lot of times when we are explicitly teaching our students a lesson, we might kind of explain it once or twice, but it's really important that we model actually using that skill, actually writing it down. In a similar way to when we're reading a story aloud, we might have one clear lesson that we're teaching them. Let's pretend we're teaching them about character details, and as I'm reading a story aloud, I'm, thinking aloud these character traits, but I'm also modeling many other things when I'm reading, right? When I'm reading aloud, I am modeling clear expression and intonation as I read. I'm modeling all sorts of things. That's the same with writing. When I am writing my stories in front of the class, I might have one clear focus, but they also get to see authentic thinking aloud, brainstorming. They get to see authentic sentences and sentence structure with clear punctuation and capitalization. They get to see that happen on a daily basis. Now, the use of a clear modeled example is something I use in every single lesson, and I do it in 2 different ways. I'd say about 75% of the time, I actually model what I want my students to do. So, and I do this, I mentioned this many times in my writing videos, but if we are learning about personal narratives, throughout this unit, as we do our writing workshop in our mini lesson, I actually compose an entire personal narrative. I do it in front of the class, that way when we are revising, I have the work up here. I add sentences, I do the say it and sketch it. I actually walk through the entire process in front of my class before they go do it themselves. It's great because we have like a living lesson here. This is, my fake picture of my example writing that I do with them. But we have this living lesson that we keep going back to, which is reminiscent of their actual work in their writing folder. Now, in all of my writing lessons in the SJT Writing Club, I give you the exact example of what I would do with my class. So here's an example right here. When I give you a lesson about say it and sketch it, it looks like this, where you can see the actual breakdown of the lesson. Here's the mini lesson, here's the preview, etc. But then when I say model this in front of the class, there's actually just a quick little link you press there and you can see exactly what I would do with the class. This way you can use this exact example if you want in your own class, or you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. There's no questioning here what that will look like. For the next part, we have stretch it out. So here I show you the exact example of a sentence I would take from my first picture to my second picture to my third picture. I go on to show you when we're adding transition words, what that would actually look like on my living work, right? On my living writing that is there in front of the class. Those are just some examples, but like I said, in the SJT Writing Club, for Every writing unit that I have, I actually show you what I would model with my own class in front of the class so you can see it. Now, I said I do teacher modeling about 75% of the time, which means the other 25% of the time we use mentor texts. Now, obviously there's many benefits to using mentor texts, but I really enjoy them because number one, it helps their students realize that like I'm not the only professional writer who knows how to, write what I want them to write. If we're talking about adding character details to a story, I will definitely go ahead and model that. But then I'll also pull out a mentor text and we will pick some parts where an author shares some character traits about the main character. And we'll talk about what words did they use, we'll kind of dissect this author's writing. It just helps give students many more examples of how they can add this to their own story, and it lets them see that, there's many different authors just like themselves, and their story and their character traits might sound different than a classmate's. Mine are going to sound different than, Mo Willems. So make sure you are modeling, modeling, modeling. Common mistake number 4 that teachers make when using Writing Workshop is they put an overemphasis on the end product instead of the process. Now listen, this is where I feel like things get a little murky when it comes to talking about Writing Workshop, because teachers are like, no, students need to have clear sentence structure, they need to have periods, punctuation, capitalization, they need to have all of that, and if they don't write that way, why are they even writing? What's the point of Writing Workshop? What's the point of having them write, these longer pieces if they're spelling everything wrong and if punctuation's wrong, etc. And I understand that train of thought. However, you're teaching 5, 6, and 7-year-old students. Their writing is not going to be perfect. That does not mean that I'm just like, excellent, excellent, great work. I mean, I am, but I also teach them how to make it better. But you need to temper your expectations. If you are teaching a kindergarten student who doesn't know all of their letters, they don't know all their letter sounds yet, you should not expect to have a perfectly written story by the end. And if you decided to go in with a red pen and just mark everything wrong, or actually what I've seen a lot of teachers do is they actually go ahead and they fix everything and then they have the student just copy it over as their like published work so it looks right, but that's not their authentic writing. I have a little trouble with that. I understand the idea behind it, but what are you actually showing as your students' work? It's not really theirs, right? It's yours. They're just going in and copying what has been done. The entire Writing Workshop block is about the process over the product. Yes, we are working towards an end goal and we're using all of the students' knowledge that they have as they create each piece to see what they need. We're looking at that end product and we're like, okay, students still need to work on end punctuation. They still need to develop their ideas a little bit more. They need to make longer, more detailed sentences. We're looking at each product they make, but in terms of the process. We want our students to not feel discouraged. We want them to persevere throughout that writing process and know that our writing gets better and better and better. I think you'd be hard pressed to find any adult that thinks they are, this amazing, amazing writer and that they don't need any more work on their writing. Writing is kind of a process that continues and continues and continues and is never done, which is why we focus on the process over the product. Now, just to reiterate one more time, like I said, this is where it gets kind of murky here and people are like, well, what is the point of even teaching them if, inventive spelling is all they're writing down and they're not making those phoneme-grapheme correspondences. But if you're actually looking at your students' writing from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, you should see a lot of growth, not just in how much your students are able to write, but also, again, in those foundational skills. If you're teaching your students during the phonics block all about encoding and what those phoneme-grapheme matches are, they should be applying them to their writing. They should be encouraged to do so during Writing Workshop. You're not like just, forget it, write down whatever you want. You're like, if you haven't learned that pattern yet, then write down the sounds you hear. But please refer back to what we already learned about our sounds and our letters. It's certainly not just a free-for-all, but we do want to prioritize the process over the product. And mistake number 5 teachers make when using Writing Workshop is they don't celebrate the author's work enough. Going back to mistake number 4, we do want to celebrate this process. Writing is a lot of work. Writing is hard for adults, it's hard for teenagers, it's even harder for our 5, 6, and 7-year-old students to, when you think about all the processes that are actually need to happen for students to get their ideas down on paper, never mind, like I said, making sure it's spelled correctly, making sure the foundational skills are all there. It's so much work. We need to make sure that we are taking the time to celebrate students along that process so we can teach them to persevere. There are so many different ways you can go ahead and celebrate student writing. You can have authors chair celebrations. You can invite parents in to look over their latest book that they published. You can have students read aloud different parts of their story that they wrote that they really enjoy. But something I also like to add into the mix is I will highlight students. So as they're doing their independent writing and I'm working with students one-on-one, I really like to highlight students that are in the process, right? So I will highlight a student that went back in and revised their sentence. If I notice a student reading their story, because I'll often have them read their story over again to themselves to see what they need to add or make sure it makes sense. If I see them go back and realize, oh, I forgot a word or I used a word that didn't make sense, and we can have them revise it and fix it, that is a huge celebratory moment. And that's something that I bring up to the whole class so they can be reminded that, hey, again, process over product. They don't need to have this perfect writing at the end, but if they can go back and they can highlight these things in their process, they're doing a great job. Now, another huge part that I want to point out here is as the teacher, you want to make sure that you are highlighting and celebrating various forms of work. Meaning, let's pretend you're a kindergarten teacher. At the end of the year, some of your students are going to have like 3 to 4 pages of a book, right? There might be one sentence on each page. It'll be phenomenal. But some of your students are still going to have their sentences dictated by the teacher, right? Or they're gonna say their sentence aloud and you're gonna write it down. That is in the kindergarten standard. That is fine. That is perfect. That should be celebrated. We do a lot of work, especially in K and 1, where students will actually use like a voice to text type simulator and they can actually share their story, whether they share an audio recording of it so I can go back and write it for them later, or they just use the audio to share their story. We want to celebrate those students as well, not just the ones that are, meeting or exceeding grade level standard. We do want to expose them to that all the time, and through our modeled writing and by sharing various forms of work, we can do that. But again, make sure you're celebrating students on all levels. And before I end this video, I actually have a bonus number 6 that I won't go too much into detail with, but the 6th mistake that teachers make when using writing workshop is they only have students write during that time. And your students should be writing at many other times throughout the day. I already mentioned this earlier, but in their phonics block, they should be writing down words to practice that phoneme grapheme mapping. They should be writing simple sentences to practice sentence structure. Your students should be sharing information from science, social studies, math, whatever they're learning. Have them write a little sentence about what they learned. You could think about your students having creative writing journals in their desks where in the morning or after the weekend or any kind of free time, one of their options is to sit down and write in their journal. So make sure you don't only use your writing workshop time to have students actually write. All right, so there were 5 common mistakes that teachers make when using the writing workshop model. Now, this video wasn't meant to be hurtful in any way, of course. I have made all 5 of these mistakes. Great teachers make these mistakes. It's totally fine. It's just something for you to think about as you go into teaching writing next year. If you need some amped up writing lessons for your own K-2 students, I have the SJT Writing Club, and this has been around for 3 years now. It's going on its 4th year. And over on the left-hand side here, you can see that pretty much for any genre of writing in K1 and 2, I have detailed, explicit lessons that you can take and use with your students. And I shared this earlier, but they also include clear teacher modeled examples. So all those images I showed you earlier, these are all from here. They also come with rubrics, and I have other mini lessons for conventions and grammar and all sorts of good stuff in here. If you're interested in learning more about the SJT Writing Club, I will link it down in the description so you can check it out. It is currently open for the 22-23 school year, so if you want to join us, now is the time. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up so I know. Make sure you are subscribed to my channel and click that bell. That way you're notified of every new video. See you in the next one. Bye.